Creo Parametric enables you to create assembly structures before defining any component geometry or specific placement constraints, so you can plan your project and delegate design tasks early on in the process. You can also assign non-geometric information to the structure in the form of parameters, such as a part number, cost, supplier, material, or anything else that might be required. In this example, we're going to go through the process of creating an assembly structure for a frame and engine assembly, and take it through a few levels to cover the different elements and information that you can add. Let's begin by adding a skeleton type part to this empty assembly. Click Create Component from the Component group of the Model tab. In the Component Create dialog box, select the skeleton model type and click OK. Click OK again to accept that the skeleton part will be created using a copy of the default template model. Take a look at the model tree and notice that we've created a skeleton part named AC40_skell and added it to the assembly. Next, we'll add the frame part to the structure. Click Create Component, name the part Frame, and click OK. Notice that the option Leave Component Unplaced is unchecked. This means that when the frame is added to the assembly, you will visually see it in the graphics area, and you'll have to add constraints to position it within the assembly. Click OK to continue. If you move the 3D dragger, you'll see the component, but because the part has no geometry, you'll place it using the default constraint. Later in the design process, you can edit the placement if necessary. Over in the model tree, we can see that the assembly structure is starting to begin to take shape. Next on the list is adding an engine subassembly to the structure. Click Create Component, and in the Component Create dialog box, select the subassembly type. Name it Engine, and click OK. Click Browse and double-click the assembly template model. This is the assembly that your engine assembly will be copied from. Click OK and use the default constraint to place the subassembly. Now let's say you knew that you needed to add additional assembly structure to the engine subassembly. To do this, go to the model tree, right-click the engine subassembly, and select Activate from the drop-down menu. Click Create Component, change the model type to Part, name that part Block, and click OK. Again, we click Browse and select the default template model where the block part will be copied from. Place the block using the default constraint, and notice in the model tree that the engine subassembly now contains a block part. Our next part to add is a crank, but when we add the part to the subassembly this time, we're going to use the Leave Component Unplaced option. Click Create Component, name it Crank, and click OK. Enable the Leave Component Unplaced option and click OK. Notice in the model tree that the unplaced crank part is identified with a special gray part icon bordered by a dashed rectangle. The unplaced option leaves the crank listed in the model tree, but it's physically unplaced and not visible in the graphics area. The crank's placement can be edited at any time, but initially you don't care where it's placed, only that it's added to the structure. Okay, for our last item, we're going to add another unplaced component named Piston to the subassembly. There. If we have components that we know are going to be used, but we're not sure where, we can add them to the structure as an unplaced component, like this 8mm bolt that we've added to the top level assembly. After the design becomes more mature, we can edit the definition of the bolt and constrain it to the appropriate model geometry. Creo Parametric gives you the tools necessary to create an assembly structure and begin assigning design tasks, even before any component geometry has been defined. This can streamline the design workflow by supporting a concurrent rather than a sequential design process.